Welcome back, Deckheads, to the podcast that talks about flesh and blood from Crash Command Games. This is Cast a Commotion. We're going to keep going on to the old theme we were doing where we're talking about the sets and what was released inside of them. In this next set, we're going to be talking about the light and the shadow. Talents have been introduced to the game. Monarch represents a huge jump. It was the biggest set that we had released to that date. And here we begin to discover what eclipse is coming to Wraith, very literally, for the next long time during the format. This is the fight between light and dark. This time on Cast a Commotion, Monarch. So much like the other episodes, we're just going to be talking about what released during this set to catch anybody up who may have joined the game late, or just needs a refresher on what was done in Monarch, what mechanics came out, what happened. You'll see that talents play the biggest role in the game from here on out in shaping the meta. It became legal May 7th, 2021. I played in the pre-release. This was my first major Flesh and Blood event. This is not what hooked me, but this set is definitely what set in motion the interest. I had opened a few packs, got a few LGSs, and got a few legendaries in my first 10 packs. I began to start a journey that day. Started a journey that day that would take me all the way to trying to create a podcast for anybody who wants to get in. No other game has inspired me this much. You didn't see me making a podcast about Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh!, any other game. I didn't play Yu-Gi-Oh! For that long, but that's not the point. Something we'll note going into Monarch is it is the biggest set released. It only had 306 cards in it. Doesn't sound like a lot when you talk about Magic the Gathering or other card games, but it was huge for this game. 31 Majestics, 6 Legendaries, 79 Rares, tons of cards came out. And that was to support not only the 4 classes, but also the 2 talents. It was kind of brutal to get through all of them. It was a wild time. This is also one of the most interesting times for Flesh and Blood in general. This is the first time that LSS had provided enough product, and as we would find out in the long term, too much product for the amount of players we had at the time. This set is starting as of this release during Outsiders time, starting to go up in value. Not a lot, but people are becoming interested in it again because more and more players are coming to check the game out. It's been a few years now, and the game's still got big names behind it and many people making the move and giving it coverage. So I think Monarch is one of the most special times for Flesh and Blood. It was a roller coaster, an absolute roller coaster. But that's for another day. That's a different topic. Today we're just talking about what it introduced into the game. The new set themes were talents. As I had said before, it's the light and the shadow. You have a light warrior, which can play generic cards, but also light cards and light warrior cards. Right? And in the reverse, Dorinthia, someone we had discovered and talked about in the previous podcasts, could not play light or light warrior cards. So, seems restricting, but it's not, and you'll find out why when we get to more deck building. But that's just the basic thing to note. If your hero has a class and a talent, it can play the class, the talent, generic, all that, and the vice versa is true for the non-talented cards. The next aspect introduced to the game was the hero's soul. Pretty vague description there, but the hero's soul is under the hero card, so any card that says it goes into your hero's soul, just tuck it under there. Just tuck it in there, under there for safekeeping. The number of cards and what cards are in the soul is public information and known to both players. So you don't need to hide it. There's not a lot right now that interacts with specific cards in a soul, but you never know. Something to note. The order of the card's soul is not relevant either. So just make a pile and just leave it there for you to note. The next mechanic that started happening a bit more, this had occurred in the past, but is much more prevalent now. Playing from the Banish Zone. You cannot play face downs, that are in the Banish Zone. And the card that goes from the banished zone to the chain or in play or whatever goes to the graveyard when it resolves, unless otherwise specified. You may still play the card from your hand if it says you can play it from the banished zone, unless it has something that says you can't. It just gives you another dynamic piece to the puzzle on how you're going to take down an opponent. So to just reiterate on the themes before we move on to card types, talents were introduced, the soul is introduced, and a lot more play from the banished zone started during the shadow block. New card types that were introduced into this were auras, instant auras. Instant auras are newly introduced combinations of cards that were put into this set. Just like an instant, they can be played anytime that you have priority, not at the start or the end of the turns, but any other time you have priority. And when played, they just hang out until they're destroyed or otherwise, right? If they have a trigger or if something happens, that's the only way you can get rid of them. The example card given is Genesis. It's a light instant aura. It says, pitch 2, cost 4. At the start of your turn, you may put a card from your hand into your hero's soul. So, from that, what we discussed previously is that the soul is under your hero. So you put a card from your hand under there. And if it's an illusionist card, you create a spectral shield token, a token that's created from this set that we'll go over later. And if it's a light card, you draw a card. So you don't have to be an illusionist to take advantage of Genesis. It just does a lot more for you if you are. There's a keyword on this card that we'll talk about later more in detail. It's Spectra, right? We'll just leave that alone for now. And then it has no defense. Little notes about it are you can play an instant anytime you have priority. We've already been over that. And auras stay in the arena until destroyed. Really? That's it. Another type of new card that was introduced is the Token Ally. Monarch introduces this type. It's like demons from the Demonastery, specifically playing the card Eclipse or Doomsday from 2 new heroes in the shadow side will get you Blasmafet or Urser. We'll talk more about those later. Or I guess we'll just say it now. Blasmafet, for example, is the one that I use the most often because I play Levia. Blasmafet the Soul Harvester is a shadow token ally that has an action that is once per turn that costs 0, attack. Whenever Blasmafet attacks, you may banish a shadow card from your hand. If you do, the defending hero banishes a card from their soul. It attacks for 6 and has 6 life. This card could probably introduce a lot of questions, so we'll answer some of those now. Like, the defending hero can be defended as normal. You can use cards to defend against the ally. It's not just an automatic hit. You can use defense reactions. You still go through all the actions of a combat chain, right? Because it is an attack. You can't defend your ally, though. That's to be noted. So if your opponent fires back and tries to kill your ally, your demon, Blasmafet the Soul Harvester, you can't really defend it. Allies are not heroes for on-hit purposes. Hit triggers still apply when dealing damage to allies. So any on-hits like Snatch, for example, all happen. But if the hit trigger says when it hits a hero, it doesn't apply. When you attack, triggers still trigger when attacking allies because you're still attacking. That simple. When you attack is all you need to read. Doesn't care if it's a hero or not, it just says when you attack. Allies are destroyed when they're dealt more or equal damage to their life. So like I said earlier, Blasmafet has 6 life. So if you deal 6 damage to it, Blasmafet goes away. Damage prevention that applies to only you or to a hero does not prevent damage. There are only a few examples that prevent damage that I can think of, and I'm not even sure if any of them could save a token. Cards that target heroes cannot target allies. For example, the wizard card Voltic Bolt can't target Blasmafet. Couldn't tell you why, it's just a thing. The next and last type of card introduced in this set were mentors. These are specific to Blitz. They look over your heroes, provide defense value or an effect depending on where you get them and how you use them. They don't have a pitch value or cost, so they can't be pitched or played. For anything that looks for pitch or cost, they don't have it, so they just don't interact with those cards. Mentors have effects while they're face up in your arsenal. You cannot arsenal a card if there is not an empty arsenal zone. So most of the time, if you have a mentor, you're not going to have an arsenal slot, but you get the benefits of the mentor. At the end of their lesson, they always have you go find a specialization. And you can elect not to find a card if you've already used it or something. It just kind of fizzles and goes away. So just to recap quickly on the cards that were introduced, the types were instant auras, can be played whenever you have priority and stay around. Token allies sit there and fight by your side, but can be killed. You can defend the attack from allies, but you can't defend the allies. And mentors, specialty type of card that has no pitch or cost, can only be turned up in your arsenal and steals your arsenal and kind of uses that slot while it's in play. All right, so that's it for card types. We're going to move on to keywords. That keyword that we talked about earlier, Spectra, is one of the more complicated keywords they could have possibly introduced. It caused a lot of problems when it first came out. Spectra is it's an illusionist aura thing, or sometimes attack. Actually, that's not a good way to describe it. It's an illusionist keyword. Okay, Spectra is an illusionist keyword, and when a player is deciding who to target for an attack, they may elect to target the aura with Spectra, or you, or whatever else. When the aura with Spectra is attacked, destroy it and close the combat chain. Though that small sentence caused so many hiccups in so many games that I played, right? People had all kinds of questions because we all didn't quite know how to play the game yet. But if you have any kind of recollection of what we discussed in episodes 1 and 2, maybe 3, right? For things to get go again, they have to make it all the way through the combat step. So, since this says destroy it, the aura gets destroyed, and the combat chain closes. The combat chain does not complete. This means the attack doesn't resolve, and any effects that require you to go further into the steps don't happen. It's just over. So unless you had more action points, Spectra was very disruptive to your combat plan. So to revisit Genesis, that card we talked about earlier, what Spectra says in its parentheses are, Genesis can be attacked. When Genesis becomes the target of an attack, destroy it and close the combat chain. The attack does not resolve. It is very specific. Any hit triggers or effects, like Go Again, they don't resolve. If the attack targets something with Spectra, opens the combat chain and becomes a chain link, but is destroyed when Spectra becomes the target. Additional costs and resources still need to be paid because to attack or to play something, you need to pay the costs before its target becomes valid. And attacking Spectra is not considered attacking a hero. It was so complicated to get a hold of this concept. I just remember as a Dorinthia player, you may remember from earlier episodes how much I love that hero. I can't describe it any better than I felt useless and almost out of the game. It was so disheartening. Luckily, I followed some of my steps and advice from episode 2 of this podcast, and I just stuck it through. I tried to figure out different ways. I started adding attacks to my deck that had 6 power. You'll find out why that's important later. And you just have to learn how to play smarter. Unfortunately, Prism against a Dorinthia was getting ahead of myself. The Illusionist from this set was almost a death sentence if you were playing Dorinthia. Like it I don't remember my record because I tried not to remember my record against that hero. Can be kind of disheartening, but in a game with so many heroes, you are going to have a few bad matchups from time to time. It is going to suck and it's going to feel bad, but every single game you just need to sit there and take notes and figure out other little tricks, or what can I add to my inventory? What can I add to my deck to try to filter in when I'm playing against this hero? A lot of the will testers are your bad matchups. There are many matchups that are 50-50. I mean, a lot of them. Lots of matchups are totally skill dependent. You are going to have at least one bad matchup because of the amount of heroes in the game today as of the Outsiders period. And I kind of alluded to having a bunch of 6 power cards in my deck during that little bit of a talk. Let's go ahead and talk about Phantasm. Phantasm is a new keyword as of Monarch that exists on illusionist attacks. Phantasm attacks are huge. They're massive, scary, they don't cost a lot, they're very efficient. But Phantasm says if the card is defended by a card with 6 or more power that's non-illusionist and is an attack action card, the attack is destroyed and the combat chain closes. So whereas Spectra kind of helps the illusionist, Phantasm hurts it in the exact same way. Attacks can just be destroyed and the combat chain can be closed on the illusionist when they're attacking. You can put an end to their turn if they have no extra action points, okay? You just have to defend with a card with 6 or more power. The most potent card that I can think of... No, we won't go with the most powerful. We'll just go with the most basic. Wartune Herald costed 1 resource. It was a light illusionist attack. And if it hits, it goes into your hero's soul. It had Phantasm, which means if you blocked it with an attack action that was non-illusionist and had 6 or more power, Wartune Herald would be destroyed and the combat chain would close. But it attacked for 7 for 1 resource. Had 3 defense. There's not many times you can say I'm going to be attacking for 7 for 1 resource with possible Go Again. And it blocked for 3. Illusionist was just a menace to me in my whole style of play, but that's okay. Things to note about these are if an attack action is destroyed, it doesn't resolve, so go against and on hits don't happen, just like the Spectra, but in reverse. It hurts the Illusionist this time. Both players have priority during the defending step. That didn't used to happen before this. It was introduced for Monarch, so you could kind of respond with giving something extra power or adding something defensive or something. When an attack with Phantasm is defended by a 6 power plus non-illusionist attack, you destroy the attack. Players can respond to this when it resolves if it checks to see if the attack action still fulfills the requirement to destroy the attack. So that means you can like reduce power or increase power of the card defending, etc. But that's just something to note. Very hard to give a defending card plus power, but it is very doable. So if a defending card goes from 5 power to 6 power, it creates the trigger. This gets more complicated with Tales of Aria and forward. But for now, that's it. So we'll just talk about those 2 Illusionists real quick. Again, the Illusionist keywords were Spectra. If you attack an Illusionist and they present a Spectra thing in front of you, it can shut down your turn. Likewise, if they're attacking you with a Phantasm card, or anything with Phantasm, you can end their turn on the spot if they don't have extra action points. Very give and take. It becomes more fair with the next Illusionist we see in the game. Next, we'll move on to Charge. It's a keyword that exists on light warrior attacks. It's basically just an additional cost to the cards that you play. When you pay your costs to playing a card, you can charge a card from your hand onto your soul. This turns on powerful effects if you care about that. We'll use Express Lightning as the example. It costs 0, attacks for 4, and it says, as an additional cost to play Express Lightning, you may charge your hero's soul, which means to put a card from your hand face up under your hero's card, right? It's optional. You have to choose whether or not you're paying it when you play the card. You can only charge 1 card per card. So you can't just charge like 3 times with one attack. You can't Express Lightning 1 time and then charge 3 times, right? Only once per card. It's 1 additional cost. Also note, all costs are paid at the same time. So later on when you have a card that costs something, you can't pitch the card and then also charge the same card, right? You need 2 separate costs being paid. The charged card is put face up under your hero, and you are only considered to have charged if a card goes into your hero's soul from a card with charge. If you put a card into your hero's soul any other way, it's not charging. So just to briefly go over that one in an easier way, it's an extra cost that you can choose to pay when you play the card 1 time. And it's the only way to get the word charge to work is by paying a charge cost, not by putting something under your hero's soul. Heading away from the light, let's head to the dark. The shadow abilities. Blood Debt. It's a new keyword that exists on shadow cards as of the Monarch set. It basically makes you lose life for access to more cards. Or more power. At the end of your turn, you lose 1 life for each card with Blood Debt that's in the Banish Zone. A really popular card for both Leviathan and Chain was Howl from Beyond. Costs 2, it's a shadow action. You may play Howl from Beyond from your Banish Zone. So that means, right off the bat, that means you can either play it from your hand or from the Banish Zone. Wherever it is, you can play it. And the next attack action card you play this turn gets +3 power. It has another ability, Blood Debt. At the beginning of your end phase, if Howl from Beyond is in your Banish Zone, you lose a life per time. So you lose life at the end of the phase. Players don't have priority during the end phase, so if you want to stop this, you have to have some kind of prevention effect or gain life beforehand or some way to turn it off. You have to do that before the end step because you're not going to gain priority and you're not going to be able to save yourself if you hit that end step. If you have multiple cards with Blood Debt, you lose 1 life for each instance of Blood Debt. So you just basically keep a running tally or just at the end of every turn count it up how much you're going to lose at the end of the turn from Blood Debt. Only face-up cards banished with Blood Debt count and will lose you to life. Face-down cards have no effect or stats. And that is actually the only shadow ability that we introduce in this set. Everything else is kind of like themed into the shadow, but Blood Debt is the only real shadow ability as of Outsiders. As of the release of Outsiders. So obviously we're still talking about Monarch. Other words introduced, mechanics introduced. The last one, actually, is Spell Void. Wow, I thought Monarch was way more complicated than this, but I guess it was just the Spectra and Phantasm debacles that happened during the release weekend that really instilled in my mind that this was a really complicated set, but way less keywords and cards were introduced than I remember. Maybe it just felt like a wondrous time for me because I was jumping in and I had played few games and this was just a whole new world of talents. Maybe that's what it was. But Spell Void is a new keyword on equipment most of the time. It basically says Spell Void X right? It'll say spell void 1, 2, 3, whatever. If your hero would be dealt arcane damage, you can destroy this, whatever the name of the card would be. And if you do, you prevent that much damage. So spell void 1 would prevent 1, spell void 2 would prevent 2, etc. Most of the time, these cards don't have a defense value, but they show defense 0, which means they can be put into front of things that require an equipment block. Something to note. Spell void doesn't go on the chain. It's not a trigger, it's just a replacement effect. Those are the things that happen immediately. Not many games have these, where it just happens. There's no reaction, there's no priority passing. It just happens. There's no opportunity to respond. Spell void is optional. You can choose whether to spell void at any time you take arcane damage. So you can save it for a really critical moment or use it up front. If a card has spell void 2 but only prevents 1 arcane damage, there won't be a leftover prevention shield. So there are some cards that say prevent the next X damage dealt to you. This is not that. This applies spell void 2, a prevention of 2 arcane damage, to 1 source. All right, that's just, it's a lot more important than you think. Remember, spell void only prevents damage from 1 source. If a card dealing arcane damage is fully prevented by spell void, it would not be considered to have dealt arcane damage. It doesn't trigger anything that relies on arcane damage. Other words that are returning during the set keywords are like battle worn. We've already gone over that. Dominate was the first set. Go again, etc. We're seeing opt again in some of the shadow instance. Yeah, I swear I thought Monarch was so much more complicated than this. I can't tell if it's just my experience and how much I've played that set and how much I've played heroes from that set or what, but I thought that was so much more complicated. Good, I guess. That means it was a better introduction product than I thought for the third set. Okay. We can just move on to the heroes then. This was such a hard time for me because this was when I was really getting seriously into the game. This was before I had chosen completely to play Dorinthia as my first full classic constructed deck, and I was really seriously looking at the first hero we're going to talk about. Some advice that I always give new players is to just find someone you like the look of, find someone you vibe with, and then just pick that hero and just play them. Either you like them or you don't. Either way, you're going to jump in the game and have a great time looking at the art and getting that aesthetic that you like. Mine is Warriors. I love me a good sword and board. I love me a good two-handed sword. Every game I play, World of Warcraft, Diablo, whatever game, Skyrim, any game that I play, any game, it's always going to be a warrior to start with. I will play other classes later, but I will always start in with the sword and board, the two-handed warrior. They're just, even in Dungeons and Dragons. I think that's actually it, because when I was younger, that was one of the first books I read was a story from Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 involving, what was his name, Regder? Yeah, I think that was his name. He's just like, I can't really describe how influential that book was on me. I think of the word warrior, I think of not the biggest dude, but like just a 6-foot guy wearing plate, leather, scale, whatever. One hand, he's got a big old two-handed sword. He's got that bow that he's holding. Stern face. Not really a mean dude, but gets shit done. I have that image in my head right now. I wish I could convey it to anybody listening, but I'm pretty sure his name was Regder or Redger or something like that. Yeah, I'm getting lost in thinking about that. The good times of just swinging a sword left and right. To get back on topic, we have Bolton, Sir Bolton Breaker of Dawn specifically. He's a light warrior, a hero, right? If you charge this turn, attacks you control have +1 power while defended by an attack action card. That's his first ability. It's a pretty good one too. It's a free +1 power if you've charged. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it really makes your opponents think of, do I really want to defend with this card? Like they might have had a plan to keep some cards, keep some other, but it kind of gets thrown out when they say, oh, but if I block with that one, the hit's going to go through and he's going to get more charge to his soul. Something to also note, it doesn't say attack actions, it just says attacks you control, so his weapons even gain this ability and benefit. They just have to be, anything that makes your opponent think more about what they're blocking with is good, because it means you're disrupting them a little bit in a very subtle way you wouldn't even think about. When you think disruption, you might think discard or adding costs to them. Nope, this one's just making them think they're making a mistake, which can even be more devastating. It's real sneaky. Bolton does have a second ability. That is an attack reaction. Banish a card from Bolton's soul. Target attack with power greater than its base gains go again. So if at any point in time the base power on a card is like 1 and for some reason goes to 2, you can then use this attack reaction to give that attack go again. For example, if they block with an attack action card and give it +1 power from your first ability. Base power is the printed value on the card for you to note. It's the bottom left corner of the card. It doesn't matter what it turns into, it's just whatever the base value is in the bottom left. Putting a card under your hero's soul doesn't count as charging, just remember that. You have to use the keyword charge and place a card under your soul that way to count as charging. All attacks you control gain that +1 while defended by an attack action card. That includes your weapons. I've already been over that. If the attack no longer has power greater than its base value and the ability resolves, it doesn't gain the go again. You wouldn't think this is a big deal, okay? But it is. There are many small, sneaky ways to take power away from attacks, and you can just rob someone of that go again by doing that. It's really interesting to think about. There's not a lot of Bolton players right now because he's a little bit harder to get going, but there are a few dedicated Bolton players that have taken events at my local areas. They just get really good with them, and it's hard to stop him sometimes. You may use the second ability more than once per turn. It doesn't say once per turn on it. It just says, attack reaction, banish a card from your soul, target attack gains go again if it has more than its base power, right? Nowhere in there does it say once per turn. You can also target the same attack more than once. Multiple instances of go again doesn't grant more than one action point, but I can't think of a reason to do this. It's just something to note. The reason I decided to go with Bolton instead of Dorinthia was because I didn't quite know the game that well. I didn't know anything about the combat chain. I had not really experienced the game in a meaningful way yet. And as I've said in the previous episodes, that's why I chose Dorinthia. Bolton had just a little bit more going for him than I thought about and could think about at the time. So that's something for you to note for yourself. Just make sure that you're getting a hero you're comfortable with. The next hero that we're going to talk about is Chain Bound by Shadow. This was the wife's first hero and many people's first choice for a competitive pick. Very simple hero. Intellect. Bolton has intellect 4 and 20 life. Same with Chain Bound by Shadow. This ability is so simple and so devastating. Chain only does one thing. Once per turn action, create a Soul Shackle token. That's the cost, is to create a Soul Shackle token. And once your next Runeblade or Shadow action this turn gains go again. So your next Runeblade or Shadow action this turn gains go again. Doesn't work for normal attacks, but doesn't matter too much. Then the ability itself has go again. Now, what a Soul Shackle is it's a Shadow Runeblade aura with, at the beginning of your action phase, banish the top card of your deck. Sounds like a punishment, but if you remember that card Howl from Beyond earlier when I was talking about Blood Debt, it says that very key phrase, this can be played from your banish. Chain was very famous for getting, quote unquote, 5 to 6 card hands. You may use this ability even if you're not planning to use a Runeblade or Shadow action afterwards. You can always just use the ability. It just says Shadow and Runeblade actions get go again, right? The next one does. Doesn't matter if you play one or not, it just says that's what happens. This affects your next action, including weapon attacks, action cards, and action activated abilities, right? So your weapon could get go again from this. That was kind of neat. The Soul Shackle token is the cost. I did say that earlier, but just really make note of that. That's part of the cost. It's going to happen no matter what. Soul Shackles stay in the arena until they are destroyed. Soul Shackles don't get destroyed when the top card of your deck is banished, because it doesn't say that, but they can be destroyed. Multiple instances of go again on the same card or activated ability don't stack, just like always. That's always going to be a rule, right? You only get the one token or the one go again that happens. You only get the one action point that happens after. The next hero we're going to talk about, sorry to move on so fast from Chain, but I guess what I should mention here is Chain is a living legend. That does mean Chain's adult version is no longer playable in Classic Constructed. That does not mean Chain's cards are useless, because as stated by James and the team at LSS, they will reprint heroes. In our estimation, and the only thing that makes sense, is that they're going to give them a different name, different ability, different everything. But all of Chain's cards, that like Chain specialization and all that, they only care about the first name, right? Chain. So some people got rid of him immediately when he became a living legend. I think that's a mistake if you're a collector. Just note, he's coming back. We just don't know when. Maybe mid-2023. We'll see. Oh, also, note, the young version of Chain is not a living legend. So he can still be played in Blitz. The next hero I wanted to talk about is Leviah, the Shadowborn Abomination. This is the one that I picked. I have a huge love for the witch, the American witch subtype. Cottage clothes, demonic strength, not so much of the broom and boil and all that, not all the cauldrons and stuff, but more the farmer that inherits demonic powers, speaks to the animals, lives in the forest. This whole thing. I love this kind of witch, and that's what the young Leviah reminded me of, and that's why I picked that Blitz deck up. I later find out her story is quite tragic. I don't talk about stories too often. I might do episodes based on that later on, but out of desperation is the Shadowborn Abomination. She has the only ability that I can think of that's only purpose is to not kill you. Like, it doesn't help you. Every other hero's ability until this point goes, oh, you get an extra attack. You have an attack reaction. You get extra power. You have on hits. You get go again. Something. Dominate. Anything. They help your game plan. All Leviah's ability does is say, if a card with 6 or more power has been put into your banish zone this turn, cards you own lose blood debt during the end phase. That does not help any of her cards. That doesn't help any of her attacks. That doesn't help her push forward a game plan. All it does is say, I might not die for a little bit longer. I stave off death. 4 intellect, 20 and 40 health for the young and the old. There's really nothing more to say about her. She's a very simple hero. But that's what attracted me to her, because she was my third hero. I wanted more simple heroes to learn the game better. I guess we can go over some notes about the hero Leviah. It doesn't matter where the cards come from when they're put into the banish zone. Hand, graveyard, play, whatever. Or even it doesn't even care if it remains in the banish zone. It just matters that it went there. Okay? A good example of this would be a card called Beast Within from Crucible of War. I wish I had the card right in front of me. As long as it didn't go to the graveyard from the chain, I think is how it's said. You banish cards from the top of your deck until you banish one that has 6 or more power, and then you put it in your hand. That, for example, triggers this ability. It doesn't matter that the card's coming back to your hand or not. It just matters that it touched the banish zone. So that's pretty cool to note. The cards only lose blood debt during the end phase. They still have blood debt during the action phase. So anything that says, for example, like her weapon, you need 6 or more cards with blood debt or something, you still get that. It only loses blood debt at the end phase. If a card has multiple instances of blood debt, they all lose all instances during the end phase. It just said, cards you own lose blood debt. It doesn't say once, it doesn't say twice, it says they just lose blood debt. Leviah checks the last known information of the attack action card before it's put into the banish zone. For example, if a 5 power card has +1 power from attacking, then it's put into the banish zone when it hits, Leviah will see the attack action as 6 power when it's put into the banish zone. That's weird to think about. Okay? That is super weird. If a card has 5 power and has +1 power from attacking, and then is put into the banish zone when it hits, Leviah will see this attack action as a 6 power card when it's put into the banish zone. That's something even I didn't know until I started making this episode. I have been playing Leviah for 2 years, and that has never crossed my mind. I am a goddamn moron that I did not know that. There are many of her, if I knew that were oh my God. That's part of the reason I'm doing this podcast. It's not just for you, it's also for me. Doing research for some of these episodes, I begin to learn a lot more about the game, and I hope listening to me, you also. It is, it's for you and me to learn how to play this game together, because there's always more to learn. For example, during the Outsiders skirmish, we did a sealed, I had learned more about how the game worked. And I'll just share it with you right now because it came to my mind, thinking about how much I don't know. I used to think that you played the card first, that generated a cost, and while you're holding priority, you could respond to paying the cost, right? So what I was trying to do was, there's a card called Threadbare Tunic, and it says instant, add a resource. You can only activate this ability if you have no cards in hand. So I thought it was play card, generate cost, hold priority, crack the Threadbare Tunic because it sees I have no cards in hand, use that to pay the cost. Nope, turns out you don't get priority when you're playing a card. You play it, and if you can't play it or pay the cost, then you can't play it. End of story. So, along with that story and this exact research moment, where I see a card on the chain with 6 or more power that's then banished, Leviah triggers off that. That's crazy. Also, if an attack has 6 base power and it gets reduced to 5 or 4 or something, Leviah doesn't see that as 6+ power. So it doesn't work. This game has so many vectors of attack on your mind. The psyops this game creates. Uh, that's all I can think of, and that's all I could really find while researching information about Leviah and what she does and the technicals of her. Super simple hero. As you can see with that last one, has a lot of interesting and spicy plays available. The last hero introduced in Monarch was the most devious motherfucker. Prism, Sculptor of Arclight, the light illusionist hero. I believe it was told to us, it could be just urban legend, but I remember it being told, and someone saw an article, someone heard an interview, all this stuff, that Prism was supposed to be slated for Arcane Rising. And you could definitely see why she would be a good counterpoint to Viserai at that point in time. Also Kano, not so much Azalea. But, well, maybe. I don't know. Point being, she must not have fit the draft structure very well. And also that would have introduced talents a little earlier. And it looks like they plan to make the game easier for the first few sets of players. Let's get into it. Prism is a light illusionist hero that has a once per turn instant. For 2 resources, banish a card from Prism's soul. Create a spectral shield token. A spectral shield token is an illusionist aura with, if your hero would be dealt damage, instead destroy spectral shield and prevent 1 damage that source would deal. That's it. She just banishes a card from her soul, can do it once a turn. It's an instant. Anytime she has priority, she creates a spectral shield, and that says if your hero would be dealt damage, instead destroy the spectral shield and prevent 1 of that damage. Once per turn applies to the current turn, not the cycle. So she can do it on her turn, she can do it on your turn, she can do it whenever. You just have to have the cards in her soul to do it. That sounds super simple and non-ominous. You think it would be easy to get rid of these things, but in this game, you're going to find out that 1 or 2 damage, 1 or 2 resources, 1 or 2 block are the things that win games. And she almost always had a source of +1 resource of any of her choosing along the line. I guess things to note about the Spectral Shield token is it's not optional. If you would be dealt damage, you have to destroy it. You can't save it. You can't save those tokens for later. If you have multiple Spectral Shields in play, you choose which prevention effects to apply first. If you're taking multiple damage, you must prevent all of it with Spectral Shields if you're able to. And loss of life is not being dealt damage. So if something says you lose life for something, it wouldn't destroy the Spectral Shields. It just gets through those. I guess I forgot to talk about the Soul Shackle a bit more. We'll do that real quick. Also, the Soul Shackle's effect is not optional. You have to banish the cards off the top of your deck if you're able to. This was the trade-off, is if you could somehow fend off the attacks for long enough, Chain would just run out of cards. Soul Shackle is a trigger that happens at the beginning of the action phase, and players can respond to it. That's kind of it. I guess to further note on that part back there, you don't lose the game for having no cards in your deck. You're just really vulnerable to getting the shit kicked out of you by your opponent. Now, I started making a habit of talking about the weapons, so we're going to continue that here. We'll just talk about the signature weapons. There were a few more weapons added to this set to give more support to other heroes, but we'll just talk about the signature weapons. We'll start with Chains, Galaxy Black. It was the most interesting one to me. If you've played a card from your banish zone this turn, Galaxy Black gained 2 power until the end of turn, and if Galaxy Black hits a hero, you deal 1 arcane damage to that hero. So it was a once per turn action for 1 resource you could attack, and it only had a power of 1. Doesn't sound super exciting, but if you were at the end of the game and you were at 1 or 2 life, and it was just coming in for 1 a turn at all times, threatening 1 or 2 damage, it was a menace. Obviously, as another Runeblade came out, everybody preferred her weapon, but we'll talk about that next time. If you've played a card from your banish zone, it can only gain the +2 power. Even if you played multiple cards, it only gets the +2 power. It only gets it once. That's why it says if you played a card from your banish zone this turn, it gains +2 power. It doesn't care about how many times you do it. The ability of Galaxy Black is continuously checking. So if you've played a card from your banish zone, if you do that after the attack or whatever, it gains the +2 power, just like the Anothos and all the other cards that wait and are always checking. That's kind of it. The weapon wasn't super crazy, but it had value in its own versus the Nebula Blade, which was the previous Runeblade weapon. The next weapons we would talk about would be Bolton's. I think Bolton's signature weapon is Raiden. Raiden Duskbane. The light warrior weapon. It's a sword that's 2-handed. Okay, so you only get the 1 weapon. And it had once per turn action. For 0 cost, you get attack. Curiously, it only has 0 power. You may attack with it even if it has 0 power. And even if you've charged multiple times this turn, Raiden Duskbane only gets its effect once. Its effect is if you've charged, it gets +3 power. I love this card. I think it's super interesting. Provides a few different vectors for shenanigans. It gains +3 power, which means it has more than its base power. It turns on its hero ability. It's all kinds of interesting. You're going to have to experiment with that one quite a bit and understand its power. Because obviously a 0 attack sword doesn't sound super cool, but he finds a way. Next up would be Levia's weapon. I think Levia's signature weapon is Hexagore. Hexagore the Death Hydra. It's a flail. It is the first flail in the game. Haven't seen a flail since, and there's nothing that really helps or assists flails. So that's interesting. It has a once per turn action, two resources attack. When you attack with it, it deals damage to you equal to 6 minus the number of cards with blood debt in your banish zone. So this kind of is supported by the suicide banish route. Kind of hard to get multiple action points to attack with your weapon and anything else, but I've made a build that utilizes a lot of quicken tokens and a lot of things like that. The damage it deals you can't be defended. It's not arcane, it's not physical or whatever. It's just damage you just get dealt. It can't be prevented by Spell Void or Arcane Barrier or anything like that. If you have more than 6 cards with Blood Debt in your banish zone, it will deal you 0 damage. Having more than 6 cards doesn't make it deal negative damage to you or heal you, right? That would have been fantastic if you've ever played this deck. A little bit of life gain on the weapon would be nice, but it sucks. The ability triggers when you attack and resolves before the attack deals damage. It just happens on the attack and resolves. Face down cards in the banish zone have no traits, so they don't have blood debt. Keep mind of that. And the last weapon we'll talk about is Luminaris. That's Prism's signature, I'm pretty sure. Also, Prism is a living legend. 2 heroes from Monarch became living legends before any other heroes. They were so powerful. Can't say I miss them, but we'll see him again in another format. Valhalla, probably. Moving on, Luminaris is the light illusionist weapon. It is a scepter, 2-handed. During your action phase, illusionist auras you control are weapons with 1 power and once per turn action attack. All right, so this turns all of your auras into weapons with 1 power with once per turn action, cost 0 attack. Not super powerful until you read the second part of the Luminaris, which is, while there is a card with a yellow color strip in your pitch zone, illusionist attacks you control have go again. Well, illusionist auras are illusionist attacks. So if you had like 10 of those spectral shields, you would have 10 single power attacks coming at your opponent. You can go really wide. You can't attack with this weapon because it doesn't have an action that allows you to do so. You attack with the auras, not the weapon. So if you have multiple illusionist auras, you can attack with those, provided you have the resource and action points. You can only pitch a card if there's a cost to be paid and there are not enough resources available to pay the cost. So to make sure you have a yellow card in your pitch zone is key before you start the attacks. A yellow color strip is a card that pitches for 2 resources, and the color strip is located at the top of the card. It was one of the first cards that started looking for that specific piece of information. The only other things we can really talk about for Monarch are, it has a few banned cards. It has something called the Belittle Minnowism package. Belittle is an attack that was a common that attacked for 3 to 1, but the point is you could, as an additional cost, reveal a card from your hand with 3 or less base power, and if you did, you could search your deck for a card called Minnowism and put it in your hand. It was another one of the first aspects of a tutoring card. Too powerful for a lot of people. I personally didn't think so, but I don't agree with a lot of bans anyway. I just want cards to live out their lives and exist. But it did show up in way too many decks, so LSS decided to axe it. So Belittle is banned. I do not believe Minnowism is. There's just not a lot of reason to run one without the other. Other cards of note that came out of this, I personally think this card I'm going to talk about is underrated. It is Exude Confidence. It costs 0. It's a generic action attack. And it says, while Exude Confidence isn't defended by a card with equal or greater power, the defending hero can't play or activate instance or defense reactions as combat chain. That is huge. So if you're playing against another smaller deck or another faster deck, and they're relying on those little tricks to get by, or even a wizard who only plays instance and things like that, it's harsh. Can't play or activate instance or defense reactions. It also has the ability of pitch 3 resources as an instant. Exude Confidence gains 2 power. Activate this only while Exude Confidence is attacking. This is one of the first instances of fire breathing from Magic the Gathering or increased power that we see in this game as an instant. You can just keep dumping resources into it as a finisher. This card I bring up because it's kind of complicated. The effect only applies when the attack is on the combat chain. and players can respond to exude confidence before it becomes a layer on the chain, right? So when they announce they're going to play Exude Confidence, that's your only time to respond with instants and things like that. Otherwise, once it becomes an attack, you're done casting instants and defense reactions. If Exude Confidence is on the combat chain and gains power from the effect, that would put it at a greater power. The effect becomes active again. Exude Confidence is still considered attacking as long as it's on the chain, even if it's not on the current chain link. You may still use its instant ability as long as it's on the combat chain. I don't know why you would do that. Maybe you just need to cycle your hand, but you can, right? If you don't like the card in your hand and you wanna just get rid of it, you can do that whenever this is on the chain. Exude Confidence doesn't stop defense reactions or instants that have already been played. For example, if the defense reaction is defending an attack on a previous combat chain, playing Exude Confidence doesn't have any impact on that. If Exude Confidence is not defended by any cards, the defending hero can't play or activate instants as long as that chain is open. You can activate Exude Confidence's instant ability during the defending window before the defending player has a chance to use defense reactions, because when they choose to defend with a card, you get priority, so you can do that. And then as long as you have the resources, you can activate that as many times as you want. It's not a once per turn instant. That is one of the most interesting cards in the game, I feel like. It's a huge challenge to any wizard that comes your way. It's a huge challenge to any of the huge defensive reaction decks. It can even be a challenge to Guardians, even though they do have bigger attacks. If they were relying on a defensive reaction to try to pass turn and just get a quick big swing at you, this can change their whole plan by making them block with something bigger. One of the other cards that I think is very interesting is called Nourishing Emptiness. This is my favorite playmat that I own right now. Also, it's a 1-of in Dorinthia. I find this card supremely interesting. So it costs 2, and it has a power of 6, which is why I first put it in the deck, was for Prism. Defense 3, and it says, while there are no attack actions in your graveyard, Nourishing Emptiness has Dominate. And if this hits, you gain an Intellect until the end of turn. This is one of the few instances in the game where you can gain more intellect than you're starting with. So what I like to do with this card a lot, with Dorinthia anyway, is attack once or twice with the Dawnblade, giving it go again, and then finishing a chain with Nourishing Emptiness. So they've already dedicated all their resources to trying to block the first Dawnblade or something, because they think that's my strategy. You can then follow up with a Nourishing Emptiness and just hit them real hard with a 6 attack Dominate. And then at the end of the turn, you draw 5 cards instead of 4 because you have +1 intellect. It's just sweet. It's just a sweet little piece of spice that I think belongs in a lot of decks. I don't know why Wizards don't use it more. If you're not using a lot of attack actions, which not a lot of decks do, I guess, this should be in your deck. I can't really think of anything else that was super interesting that came out of Monarch. Oh, I'm a fucking idiot. Carrion Husk. It's probably too late to get in on this card cheap. But when Chain got banned by becoming a living legend, people were dumping their Carrion Husks because the only hero that could use it was Leviah. And not a lot of people like Leviah because she's just not that easy to win with, and she's just a challenge to play. This is an equipment. Now, if you've been listening for any amount of time or been paying attention to some of the card values I've spouted off, even defense reactions, right? The defense value of this chest piece is 6. That's huge. That is huge. I can't put it in any other way. From a Magic perspective, it borderline looks like a time walk in this game. If you defend with Carrion Husk, you banish it when the chain closes. That means the second that chain closes, it goes to the banish zone. You don't get any chance to respond to that ability, I don't think. At the start of your turn, if you have 13 or less life, you banish the Carrion Husk anyway. It just goes away, so you have to know when to use it too. The most irritating part about this card is that it has Blood Debt, so that once you do block with it, you go onto a clock. There's so many more cards. There's so many more cards that are mildly interesting, but nothing of huge note past that. Monarch is a huge set that you're just going to have to look into and explore, kind of, and get used to the light and shadow talents. It's really cheap as of the Outsiders launch, right? People haven't quite caught on to buying it all. if you can get yourself a draft box, just like every other of the first 4 sets, make sure to get a draft box, draft it with your friends, crack some packs, and really feel out the set. It is massive, so don't crack packs to try to get what you need. This set had way too many cards in it for that. You'll just need to open up so much more product than you think. Just buy singles for this one for sure. Other sets you can kind of justify because they're only like 230 cards, but this is 70 more to 80 more cards than normal. Just a lot more variants got added in with this set, and it's just hard to open what you're after. But definitely draft this set, feel it out, get some of those light and shadow cards before the next set comes out. God, I really can't say it any better than that. Monarch was just a sweet set. I feel like I was hyping this up in my head as being a way more complicated episode because of all of the abilities. I think I described everything in a way that you'll be able to understand. If you have any questions, comments, or anything like that, and you're on the Patreon, go ahead and shoot me something to talk about. I can answer a few things. I've got a good supporting network of judges around me. I trust them quite a bit. Me and them have been able to talk out a lot of the rules and have a really good time with the tournaments in my local area. Also, if you're going to check out anything else, make sure to jump into that Discord. There's a little bit of a Magic community, not a whole lot. We're primarily focused on Flesh and Blood and other video games. Make sure to always check out my store. Please, God, check out that store because that paid for this microphone, stand, equipment, recording. Everything that I'm talking into right now was paid for by Crash Command Games on TCG Player. You can always, if you're on the Discord, also just shoot me a list, and if I have some of the cards, I can get them to you that way as well. Other than that, thanks for tuning into this episode of Casted Commotion. This podcast is 0.